Welcome to the ADHC Talks podcast, produced by the Alabama Digital Humanities Center at the University of Alabama Libraries. I'm your host, Sara Whitver. This video podcast documents digital humanities research through semi-structured conversations with DH scholars and practitioners. We record 4 episodes each semester, caption them, and publish them on YouTube.
Today, our guest is Jeff Turner. Jeff, I'm going to share what I've prepared about you, and then you're welcome to fill in the gaps. So Jeff received his PhD in U.S. history from the University of Utah. His expertise lies in digital humanities, American religious history, and migration. And his research traces the ways migration and immigration inspectors and policymakers construct religion at the U.S. border in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. Professor Turner's digital work spans a variety of digital humanities methods. He entered DH along with grassroots graduate student group at the University of Utah, who taught themselves to topic model and published an article together. His subsequent experience came from wanting to understand the relationship between critical theory and project building, and also a desire to pay the rent. So you're very practical. He's worked on public humanities projects such as the Century of Black Mormons, Native Places Atlas, and the Wilford Woodruff Papers Project. And he works in Python, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and a little bit of R in SQL. Other things I have learned about Jeff over the past few months. He's a gluten-free baker, and he knits. And he's also really good at making space for colleagues to work together collaboratively, which I am really loving. So we have a truly nerdy, fantastic human here today. Welcome, Jeff. I'm so excited to have you here with me today. And I want to tell you before we get started that when I am doing intro and orientation sessions, or like if people need to know what Omeka S is, I use the Century of Black Mormons project, and I didn't know that you were a part of that. That's one of my exemplar projects. So I thought that might make you happy to know that like that is being shared widely. And I'm so happy to know somebody who knows more about that project, because now I can ask questions. So is there anything else you'd like to share before we start our conversation?
No, that's great. That honestly, I think was the sweetest intro I've ever had. That's like, I'm happy to walk anywhere in life with that intro. Thank you.
Well,
that's so good.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So I have a standard set of questions that I ask everyone. And the first one is probably the most important one to me, because I want to know about your research. But most importantly, I like to know what makes you feel nerdy and excited.
Yeah, this is a hard question to answer, I think. So I'll start with the research, and hopefully we get into the nerdy and excited. So my research really stems from what I feel like is falling backwards into what was my dissertation project is now my first book project. And basically, I was just really interested in the ways that mobility and religion intersected. And so my master's thesis was all about that. Don't read it. It's pretty terrible. And I just took a class and I read a really good immigration history book. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. That's the thing. And so I wrote this paper about essentially Mormon responses to the 1924 Immigration Act. This is like the most restrictive immigration act in American history. Sort of lowers the foreign board rate in the US to the lowest percentage of the domestic populace in all of American history. So what are the reactions? And then I kept working backwards chronologically. So what I wrote about was that in the 1891 Immigration Act, the federal government excluded polygamists from entering the country, a sexual and marital category. But I found in subsequent research that it's actually a proxy for talking about religion. So these laws can't be established because of the First Amendment. You can't privilege one religion over another. And actually, the first bill that proposed to ban polygamists proposed to ban Mormons by name in 1887. It went to committee, came back with the word polygamists. So it's like a secular word to deal with religious groups.
Yeah.
And also at the border, in practice, that clause is still in the books, by the way. So immigrants are asked that today. But in practice, for the first 30 years of its implementation, it was used to exclude Sikh migrants from India and Muslim migrants from the Ottoman Empire and also India. So it's kind of this like useful category for prejudicial inspectors at the time to just sort of blanket through religious illiteracy and just broad prejudice to blanket exclude like religiously undesirable migrants. In the process of doing that research, I had to read the congressional record, which is a transcript of the debates that Congress has. Don't recommend that. I also did it during COVID in a windowless basement while quarantining. And so I read like 30 years of the congressional record to figure out like, where did this law come from? What did they care about? How did they amend, the questions and stuff? And it turns out they talk about religion and they talk about religious groups, but the terms are not ones that you might recognize. That was not a good emotional choice. That was I don't recommend that other people spend their quarantine time to do that. And so really, my current digital research is born out of a desire to not have other people go through that process. I'm trying to OCR the congressional record in a more accurate way. There's like a ton of PDFs with, you can make them images and stuff. But the columns are all funky. Modern OCR engines have a hard time reading them. And then use them for different kinds of text analysis, network analysis. I have this data, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with it. So what I've done thus far, like last semester and this semester, is, oops. Resume. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Sweet. So this is a page of the congressional record from, I think this is 1913 or 1915. I can't remember which one. I know it's not 1914. And what I've done is I've taken about 600 pages and just drawn boxes for the different categories of text. This is like not crazy sophisticated. This is a header. This is a column. This is a column. This is a table. There are a few other sort of kinds of categories, but like those are the big ones. Right. And so if I can break up the document and then say, okay, just read the text in the header, or just read the text in a table, or just read the text in this column, then it turns out OCR engines have an easier time ingesting like the tabular layout of a page if you can isolate text. So after labeling this data, I trained an image segmentation model is what it's called. It's a neural network to try and predict these boxes on subsequent pages. And then I'm trying to run some just ocular character recognition to provide a more accurate set of text than you would get like using Tesseract or using Adobe, which also takes forever, by the way, because the congressional record is huge. It's like, so there's a scale question too. And then after that, I've run a few topic models. So this is one of them. There's like 1,000 topics, so kind of a lot. And there is a polygamy one in here and an immigration one, and I forget what number they are. I should have prepped that. But this is essentially using what I call the new school of topic modeling. So this is based on a BERT transformer using embeddings to try and cluster like words together rather than the sort of traditional bag of words approach. And I don't know if it's better or worse than the old school, what I call the old school, and sort of frequency-based bag of words approach. But that's what I'm trying. So I'll be able to talk about it more a little bit later. And then what I've done recently is in a okay, let me in a DH class that I'm teaching this semester. Can you see that? Sweet.
Yeah.
Okay. So this essentially is this is Gephi. Gephi's great. And I have for just about 1,000 pages, so not anything significant in terms of the congressional record. But I've created a script to search and filter out pages that don't have a word that you're searching for. So to filter in pages for some kind of keyword. This is polygamy. And then I've used like a named entity recognition library to try and find, names of places and people and proper nouns and those kinds of things. And then if those named entities co-occur, I've created an edge or a connection between those entities. So this is the polygamy network for a year. It doesn't make a ton of sense, but South Carolina turned out to be like the state that submitted the most petitions to amend the Constitution to prohibit polygamy. And if you like dive into some of the middle stuff here, you'll find some other stuff too. Utah's in here somewhere, can't remember where. But yeah, so the point to me is to provide or to try and explore like different pathways into this data set, this text, to make it usable, machine readable, and then also hopefully to be able to sort of pick out discourse in a way that you don't have to spend a year in a basement without natural light. So that's where I've been. I hope that it continues in a fruitful direction. I'm trying some new text analysis methods, sort of learning along the way. So, yeah. Anyway,
well,
I don't know if that answers the question.
Hopefully it looks like you have a window in your office now.
Yes.
Like you graduated to having a window.
I'm above ground.
Which direction does your window look into? Do you look at the Wiz quad, or
I look at the library? I look at where you are. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, the sun comes in from that direction quite nicely. I'm thinking about a lot of the reading that I did during lockdown, and I definitely just read like Hunger Games.
That's amazing.
I was like, I can't do the serious stuff. I had my own research projects, obviously, and analyzing data and wrote an article. But all I remember is reading like Hunger Games, and then that took me into like all of the other YA post-apocalyptic like.
It's a good genre.
Yeah.
Honestly.
It's something that I've really enjoyed.
Also, that's like such a nice cathartic. Have you read Station 11?
No.
Okay. It's a book from 2011, and it's about, and this might strike a little close to home. It's about a flu epidemic that kills most people in the world. And so but I think it's really beautifully told. I read it after COVID, and I was like, oh, this hits some places that I don't know if I'm okay with, but also like feels a little bit cathartic.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's nice. Yeah. I read a lot of sci-fi.
We should talk.
And a little bit of fantasy.
Okay.
So,
we're in the same orbit then.
Good deal. Good deal. Okay. So in all of that, I think the parts that I sort of identified as what I would identify as you feeling nerdy is actually like the process of the topic modeling and the process of like not actually the data itself, but what you were able to do with it and the ways that you were able to interact with it. And I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit more about that, because in your intro, I read that you taught yourself how to do all of these things, but you seem to have a pretty sophisticated understanding of what they do. So you did a really good job of teaching yourself. You're not just like flying by the seat of your pants. So maybe you can talk about the difference between that more historical topic modeling and the one that you're working with right now, and sort of the mechanics on the backside. I know that the old topic modeling is very much like based in, and I am not really conversant with like technical terminology with this, but I know that it has to do with frequency.
Yeah.
I know that it has to do with, other things that would be included in an n-gram, right? So, and you have a network analysis, like a network graph that is really quite nice. So maybe talk about, I don't normally see topic modeling in a network graph, as far as I know. It's always been more of the word tree, or talk about those things.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I find really interesting in my sort of DH past self is like I believe in what's called Conway's Law, or at least that's been true in my experience thus far. And Conway's Law says that your design systems will reproduce the communication structures that the designers bring into the labor of making a thing. And that's probably not, anyway, that's what I remember it being. So if that's what it actually is or not, that's maybe a different thing. But for me, that's always been true. And that's part of the connection that I feel between critical theory and project building. Because like we're all making choices. It's not like our tools are neutral. It's not like there's really one way to get to a product. It's not like there's really one product to get to that everyone will get to if you do the same thing. And that's especially true in topic modeling. So like what I call the old school, and this is my unofficial, I've never seen this anywhere else. But what I call the old school of topic modeling is basically taking a corpus and like you choose to segment that corpus into bags of words. If you're using like Mallet or something that you can control the settings for, you can choose how many words are in those bags. So that's one way to edit that. And then it counts, the frequency of those words within that bag, creates a ratio for every word, tries to place every word into a topic, and then compares those frequencies and topics across bags. And it will iterate often like 100 times. It will iterate until it's like stable-ish. And then those are your topics, right? So that's the old school. And it works great. It's what you see like on Voyant. You can't control the bag of words size, but you can control the number of topics and the number of words in a topic. I think you can also control the number of iterations, but I can't remember. That might be a different setting. Anyway, so like it's pretty good. The problem is that you're losing semantic meaning, which anyway, I have critiques about methods that retain semantic meaning, but you're losing semantic meaning, and you're also assuming that like the discourse that happens about a topic is like syntactically near like itself. So like, I mean, English is pretty reliable for that, but like not always. Like, especially in the congressional record, debates can happen for like 7 pages. I mean, like there are some real egos who are given speeches in like 1908 in Congress. And they talk for at least an hour, I think. Anyway, so like it's not necessarily the case that assumption is true. So like the new school methods, which is what I used for this visualization, instead try to break up words, and there are no bags of words. So that's like one of the big differences. But break up words either individually or into tokens or something like that, and then embed them with semantic meaning as, oh my gosh, position and direction. Starts with a V.
I should know this word too. Like I do a lot of this kind of work, but
it's how embeddings works. I can't remember the word. Anyway, So it transforms words into multidimensional space, and then you
Yeah.
use a clustering algorithm to try and find, words that are semantically closer to each other, right?
Mhm.
And so that method of topic modeling is really like what undergirds large language models, generative
Mhm.
AI, like that's all that stuff
Mhm.
works, right? What I have found is that there are different kinds of settings that you can tinker with. You can use different clustering algorithms. You can change the scope of your embedding. So you can actually use bigrams or trigrams to create embeddings as well. And like, there are just lots of sort of granular choices.
Right.
And I don't know which one is the most accurate for what I care about doing. But I think it's interesting that you can change what this tool assumes retains the semantic meaning. You can actually change the semantic meaning just by changing the scale of like what gets embedded. Um,
Mhm.
the other thing that I found is that these tools are really built for like shorter texts, just by the nature of embedding. And
Mhm.
so, in order to use them on larger texts or historical texts, which are often longer, you have to manually break up the text in the first place as if you were manually creating a bag of words anyway. So it's like some of the methods you end up replicating to be used in certain circumstances, even though the what's under the hood is, quite different.
Mhm.
Um, so like those are all commitments. Like those will all impact, the outcomes. And so like my questions that I'm interested in too are like, you know, how do we make informed choices about these tools that are really oriented for like understanding the discourse that's happening on Twitter or something, right? Like,
Mhm.
or to like filter the kinds of reviews that people leave on Amazon and like generate
Right.
something that's in the aggregate so that you know what you're looking at. How do we adapt these tools that are oriented for these digitally born texts in a sort of, social media kind of
Right.
capitalistic world, for the production of knowledge or for exploring research questions in a totally different context? Um,
Yeah.
and so I find that like the thing that undergirds a lot of my work. And I think there are other kinds of questions too. I think it's really embedded with
Yeah.
community. But that's like, I can talk about that in terms of past
Yeah.
projects. I don't know if that answers. I feel like I'm going into right field with your questions, but anyway,
There's
I hope
no
it.
right answer. There's no wrong answer. I'm just fascinated. I get really nerdy about project management and about developing structures that I can reuse over and over. I really, enjoy like the big picture project planning portion of things. And I ask a lot of the same questions because I work on a semantic level with some of my stuff. My data sets are really small though. Like I will take a set of 60 Instagram posts and build a lexicon out of their hashtags, right? So it's like not even really huge.
It's
It's not a
it's so
huge
cool,
data set.
and it tests tools in a different kind because like all of these tools are built for big data, right? But there's like
Mhm.
a world of scholars who are like, okay, well, what does that
Yeah.
mean for small data
Yeah.
or medium data or whatever?
Yeah.
Like, how do you adapt tools to do
Hmm.
that kind of analysis?
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really interesting when I do that, I mean, it makes me feel nerdy, is being able to derive semantic meaning that is community contextualized, like framed within a community that 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 doesn't have anything to do with like mainstream usage of words, and also just the comfort of knowing that this is a snapshot of how some people do this.
Right.
And like if I use these terms outside of this small group that very it's a really random group because they're not talking to each other, they're just often they're not even aware of each other. But if I pull out of this small group the meaning is going to change radically. So it's like, why are they deriving this meaning in this moment for the things that they're doing? And how is that like their target? What are they trying to say? Like, what does that tell us about their audience? And what does that, I talk a lot about world building. So like, what are they trying to get across to people so that people can learn about their experience and understand the way that they frame it? So yeah, I think a lot of these things are really cool. I have tried to put some network analysis in Gephi together with my data. Mine never look as pretty as yours.
Well, that's sweet. I don't know how useful mine is, though. I mean, like,
I don't know. But what I've learned, even just doing that, is that every decision that I make impacts the way that other people are going to understand my data. And so I have to choose my nodes and my edges. And even the choice of nodes and edges, like that's not obvious. You have to make intentional choices about that. And so you are creating meaning and like interpreting things for other people that like it says a lot about you as a researcher too.
yes,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like, especially with things that are visual in their products, like network charts, like,
Yeah.
We all have this assumption that what we're looking at is final or objective or complete or like, referential to reality. And, like they're just kind of, we have assumptions about the visualizations that we see. And so like, I'd love, like, I think that there's something really interesting. I would love to see if like there's a way where your, interlocutors are like speaking back against the power dynamics of their information networks and like linguistic cultures. I wonder if there's a way like this is me spitballing. I don't know the answer, but I wonder if there's a way in like using digital tools to do the same, where you're like speaking back against the dynamics or the assumptions that like,
Yeah.
maps are referential to the way that space actually is, or that like networks are referential to the real connections that are out there in the world. I wonder if there's a way to destabilize those assumptions too.
I think that there's work that's being done in that area. We see a lot of like post-colonial stuff that reorients the map of the earth and,
Right.
Really challenges like what is up and what is down and like, where is our center of focus? Because we have this very westernized, traditional north, south, and then like, Europe and the United States is front and center, and then everything else is sort of like very far away. So I think, there's some scholarship that's doing that, but there's also a lot of really critical scholarship challenging some of these other ideas of westernization and like Western ontologies of understanding data, right? They're fascinating projects. I wish that I hope we can see more of them. And I think, I think that there's going to be some really interesting things that come out in the next couple of years here with this. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. Totally.
I want to go ahead and move on to our next question.
Great.
Because I think you've dipped in and out of it. But what is your history with digital humanities and digital scholarship? And like, I think you've already answered this, but how did you arrive at your current project? And I guess what I want to know with that more is like, we've talked a little bit about the emergence of you from your master's to your PhD, and you're in a faculty appointment now, and you have your own students. I guess, how did you get from that curiosity of a master's student to where you are now? And I think what I would like to hear from you is sort of in your present day, if we're talking about like being in the present, what are the things that you look back at as the most significant sort of precursors to where you're at, or like also like what are the things that you were like, oh, I did that and I don't ever like backing up slowly kind of situations, because we all have those too, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful question. Yeah, thanks. That's a thoughtful question. I think there are a couple different things. So my intro to DH really began with the group of graduate students. We were all together, and it was like kind of this like pre-moment at my PhD granting university. There's now a DH center there, and there wasn't when we were gathering together, but there was interest. Like people, there was a network of people, and so like we started just sort of meeting together, reading. I think it's Matthew Jockers's Introduction to Text Analysis in R, or whatever that book title is. So we just literally met weekly, read together, and like tried some stuff on our, really crappy and cheap laptops. And like that felt really good. It assumed, I think, that all of us had interest and time to spend, which, are privileges. And we had people drop out for, totally normal and real reasons. And so we ended with 4, but it was like, to me, it was like the way to explore a new tool. I was interested in technology sort of vaguely anyway. But like, that was like, oh, computers can do things that I like don't know how to do by hand, or I could do it in a very long period of time by hand or something. And then after that, it really just snowballed into a network of like being the dude who was willing to like spend some time to learn a thing. And so like my former advisor, he was like, hey, I want to make a website for this like student assignment where students go out and document historical markers in the state of Utah. And so I was like, okay, like let's do WordPress, because I don't know how to do anything else. And so we made like this really, sort of rudimentary WordPress site. And then it kind of evolved over iterations of the assignment. And then like there was another project that he had an idea about, which turned into Century of Black Mormons. And I had learned more by then. And so like it was just kind of the snowballing network. It turned into an eventual graduate fellowship where I worked on a project, and then knew somebody who worked in a nonprofit that had money to do another project. And so I think it was really driven by social networks and infrastructure and stuff too. But the other thing is that like you learn on the job, or you learn on the project. Like you don't go in knowing everything about what you're trying to do. And so to me, like DH work has always been project-based learning. Like I had never really interacted with Omeka S before we tried to craft Century of Black Mormons into a project. And then, we just figured it out together, like 4 of us in a room in the summer, like, hey, what's the workflow look like? Oh, you want to do that kind of a thing? Let's translate that into like metadata speak. And like, it was just this real kind of collaborative ethos that I think really makes me feel quite nostalgic.
Yeah.
But you learn along the way. So like, I didn't know Python until probably, I don't know, the last few years of my PhD or something like that. And just totally taught myself. I was like, I would like to have a website as I go on various job markets. Let's build that in Python, because why not? And so like, I think that to me, what that is that we all are on these technological journeys. And if we can just find people to, move with you for a few moments, or to affirm and like undergird and support you as you go on your learning journey, then like that's a good world to live in. I think there's a little bit too. I mean, I grew up outside of San Francisco, like in the 90s. And so like we would go to flea markets and there was like old PCs that, some Silicon Valley, person was getting rid of to upgrade or whatever. And so like my brother and I would go to those flea markets and like find random parts and components and try and put them together. And then it often doesn't work, but sometimes it does. So I think there's always been kind of like a curiosity and maybe naive confidence, because like one of the problems with DH is that, and coding, but also just DH in general, is that like you're going to run into relentless and endless errors or bugs or something. And so you have to like be able to like kind of beat your head against the table enough to get something to work.
Right.
And I think that like that childhood background, and also being able to ask my brother now, like, hey, what do you think about this? Is this the right way to think about a problem? And he was like, no, you're being an idiot. Like, is also really helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, I think there are a couple of
Yeah.
things. The things that make me feel really good though are like feeling like I am learning technological stuff in an ecosystem, either as a part of a team or as a part of a network or something like that. I think that we can often feel quite alone in those moments. And that's also where my sort of belief about aligning critical theory and projects together comes from, because I've had projects that have failed. Like I've had projects, and I don't want to name any names, but like I've had projects that are not on my website, that like the communication structures are stilted, or somebody is more interested in a topic than somebody else, or there's no like communal shareholder stake invested in a project or something like that, and they failed. Like the structure of them is stilted and have failed in those moments. And also like looking back on some of my past projects, like I would build them totally differently if I had the experience that I do now, which of course is a dumb hypothetical, but like, like there's one project where like the tools that we used, I think in terms of the value of the tools were right.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the like pragmatism of the tools, just made it 20 times more complicated than it needed to be. And so like, I would have just, now if I were to build that same project, I would just use, a framework to make it. I wouldn't use like a content management system, because it's just easier to do some of the customizable stuff that the project demanded. But like, I don't know, it's all a journey. Like
it is.
It's all iterative, I think.
So much of DH is iterative.
Yeah.
It is. Everybody's reinventing everything always. I feel like, you get halfway through a project and then you look back and you're like, oh, we should have done it this other way. And then there's like an entire summer spent redoing it. And I see it over and over again. What's interesting about that is that the process of learning about your content when you're doing that. You're becoming informed about organization, but you're really like becoming more familiar with and having a much more clear picture of like how you want to frame your content and how you want to present it and the delivery mechanism. It's also interesting. And I think that process really tells us a lot about the shelf life of a DH project in general. I am constantly talking with people about like, what are you doing to keep your data organized? And, how are you preserving it and documenting it so that when your project that just took you 5 years to build breaks, you can redo it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so many questions about like data and making data like mongerable or something, like being able to be ingested into different systems. So many questions too, because I mean, I think the average is like a DH project lasts, or you can plan to have it last like 5 years or something if it lives on the internet. I can't remember where that's from, but like, so like if that's your timeline, like how do you make choices if it takes you 5 years to build a project? Is it worth it to have it only live 5 years after that? Or how do you plan to have it live longer? Like, I don't know. Yeah, I think those are really interesting questions too. I try and be having bitten off more than I can chew in the past. I try to like be the sort of scope and sustainability moderator a little bit for like some of my students who are working on projects too. And like, I think that's only something you can learn from trying to plan experience.
Yeah.
And like having it work or not work, and then having to update it or not update it.
Yeah. That brings up something that is not on my list of questions, but I think it's possible that you and I are both in the midst of really trying to figure this out. You're probably further ahead than I am, but there's a big difference between planning a project with an established researcher who hasn't done DH, but has done research, and meeting with, for example, a master's student who hasn't written their thesis yet, and they're trying to figure out, they have these vague digital ideas about their master's thesis. And something that I am having to be more and more careful about is reining them in because of the possibilities, because they need to actually write that physical master's thesis that has to be a text object, right? And like the possibilities when you slide into the digital realm are vast. Like, are we talking about just making some network graphs of some sort, or are we talking about setting up like a gallery of visuals? Or are you actually building out a whole project? And some of them want to like just do it all.
Yeah.
And some of them have a lot of skills, you know. Some of them have web development skills, and some of them have all kinds of coding skills, and they have, their subject expertise is pretty robust already. And it's that project scope. And then I'm always afraid, this is like a fear that I'm constantly living with, that I am going to tell a graduate student that they can do a project and then it's going to explode their timeline and that their advisor isn't going to know enough about what they're doing to be able to pull the reins.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to ask people to bring their advisor in when they talk to me, because like it's too critical a moment.
Yeah.
How was your experience? Because you have students making projects just for class.
Right. Yeah. So like, I think you're hitting on some of the problems in DH more broadly, which are like, it's so easy to have DH labor be unrecognized, be um, and like to have skill acquisition also be invisible. Julie Flanders has a really good piece about this, but she writes that like there are certain types of characteristics that graduate students often have, like ones who are willing to kind of abnegate their sleep, or like mental well-being, or spend a year in a windowless basement reading the congressional record. Like part of the kind of academic ambition that makes its way into graduate school and wherever else is this desire to chase something for its own ends, which means often you're willing to have some of your labor go unrecognized. And like, not that we should all be, billboarding narcissists or something. But I think that one of the beautiful things that you're doing with your students is that like, just by having those conversations, advisors can see the like potential labor that goes into a digital project just by exploring those possibilities. And that's a positive, that's a positive good. One of the things that I'm doing with my students is I'm having them journal after every time they do a digital thing. Part of that is like pedagogical, like, you're more willing to pull something out of your toolkit if you know that it's there. But part of that is also like, hey, like, I want you to think back and recognize what you did for yourself, like much less, for a job environment or something like that. But like, you've done something, like, know that, write about that, have that be a part of yourself. And I think that that's like some of the most important labor too, because I think that helps. I think that helps with awareness of how much you can do. I think that helps with knowing like, oh, if I can name the labor that it has taken me to get a network chart visualized, then I know that like when I'm planning this project that's a network chart of network charts or something, like whatever, I mean, I just made that up, but like, whatever it is, then they have some way of knowing how to, generalize and universalize their time. And so I think that's part of the labor. I'll let you know after the semester whether journaling is enough. But I think also the thing that's been really helpful for me is that every project that I've done has had included like a project plan, like a contract, a proposal. And it's like, this is the question, this is the data, these are the tools, this is the infrastructure, this is what I think the labor is going to be. And like, it's really some of my least favorite work to do, to like write those out. But like, it's also the thing that I turn to the most when I'm in the weeds, can't figure out something. It's like, all right, this is my guide. This is how I, see the forest for what I think it is. It turns out the forest is way bigger. Okay, how do I make it smaller? So I think that's been some of the most helpful things personally. Mm-hmm. But it's hard. I mean, like,
do you make your students write out one of those proposals?
Yeah, they're just turning them in next Wednesday.
Okay.
So. Yeah, it's really short. It's pretty simple. I've told them sort of scope wise what I'm hoping for their final projects, and so like, these are the questions you need to answer. This is, how I hope you'll think about it. Feel free to include anything else that you think you need to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah. I've actually started implementing something very similar whenever I have meetings with people, because I consult on projects across campus as my role in the ADHC. And I actually ended up about a semester ago or so, maybe before Christmas, maybe last semester, I just put a Qualtrics questionnaire together for myself.
Oh, cool.
That has like boxes like, what is a summary of the meeting? What is a checklist of things that I need to do? What are some external links that like, and then I give myself a space for reflecting on like anything that's going on in it. Like this is a comment on the trajectory of the project, and I see them, you're shifting in what their plan is or any of that kind of stuff. But there's like 4 big boxes that I make myself fill out every single time I meet with anyone, and it goes into a spreadsheet.
That's great. That's so helpful. That's so helpful.
It is. I think otherwise I think I'll remember it, and then I go do something else and I don't remember it.
Yeah.
I also have a little bit of trouble. I was trying to do documentation for stuff like that, and I was like, oh, I'll just keep a running document with the date on it as a header. Every time I meet with this person about this project, I'll go back into that document. And then like, I didn't.
Yeah.
So having it in Qualtrics keeps it in a package for me.
The other thing that I encourage for my students is like, as you're working, like add to the proposal, like document your label, like,
Yeah.
if you were to hand this off to somebody else in the future,
Mhm.
like provide enough information for them to be able to figure it out with, some level of
Yeah.
investment. And I think that might be a same. Anyway, that might be another similarity. We should compare our categories of documents.
I like that. So you mentioned a book project.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that book project and how it's different from the dissertation project that you've described?
Yeah, it's very similar, but expanded. So there are sources that I know that I need to look at. Part of the problem of being a historian is that we, all make our own archives, which I guess is just a humanities problem more broadly. But I know that there are sources like in the National Archives that I need to look at in order to fill out the story that I have already scoped for myself, the sort of history of the polygamy clause and migrant encounters with the polygamy clause between 1891 and 1924. So like the first federal-ish years of immigration control in U.S. history. And I have some choices that I need to make about what the throughest of the through lines are to undergird it. To me, it could expand beyond the polygamy clause in immigration law to deal with all of the ways or many of the ways in which religion gets constructed at the border. There's for example, language about priests. If you're a minister of the gospel, you can skirt through the border, which is also part of the 1891 Immigration Act. In 1917, they allow entry for those who are fleeing religious persecution. And there are other kinds of categories like that. So it could really balloon into this kind of broader thing. I don't think it will, because I think that's knowing the labor that I've done for this moment. I feel like that's like a 1,000-page book or 2 books away or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think that it will be a fuller history of the polygamy clause in immigration law, which is really a story about religion and disestablishment, or the problem of establishment. But it's also about colonialism, deals with American imperialism, deals with kind of category classification problems. How do you find a polygamist? Well, you ask them a question: are you a polygamist? Turns out that's not the most effective way to find polygamists, because you can just say no, right? And so then there are other kinds of questions that pop up. Do you believe in the Quran? And the Quran says that you should have multiple wives. So you believe that you should have multiple wives, those kinds of things. So I think it's going to be a fuller depiction of the first 30 years of this polygamy clause in federal immigration law.
Yeah.
And what that might mean for thinking about the kind of problem of law, disestablished law, and the reality of concerns about religious civilization or primitiveness or something like that. So I think that's what it'll be. But ask me in a couple months. I'm working on the book proposal right now.
Okay. Yeah, you're still early in the process.
Yeah.
So, your book really obviously is an academic book, but you have some web presence. Do you have different audiences for different portions of your work? And how do you think about that?
Unsuccessfully, I think. I really care about public audiences. Much of my digital work is what could be categorized as public humanities or public history. I also care about that in writing. I don't know how successful I am at implementing, not using jargon as much, really sort of showcasing the multiple pathways into whatever I'm trying to talk about. I don't know how successful I am at that, but I care about it. I think that the other affordance that digital projects give that a university press book does not give is that like it doesn't cost anything. It's easier to find. There's something a little more democratizing about the access of digital projects. And you can also sort of, I mean, like this is like, UX, user experience design or whatever, but like you can think through the multiple pathways into a project and through a project in a different kind of way than with a book. You just write a book and hope that somebody reads it. So like for Century of Black Mormons, the conversations that we had were really about like, okay, we want the DNA of this project to be biographies. We want people to end up at a biography because that's the, the vision, the goal. So how do we structure the navigation of the site and the categorizing of these biographies in such a way that it like will guide people there through whatever their interests might be, whether that's alphabetical or chronological or geographic or whatever. And so like, I think that thinking through like those kinds of interactivities affords a way to make scholarship public. I mean, one of the big questions, I'm sure you have a better answer for this than I do for myself, but like one of the big questions is like, who cares? So you're writing about, currently, like you're writing about a century, almost and a half old law that like targets a small group of migrants. Why should we in 2025 in the digital age care? And for me, it's like, I hope that you can see the roots of our contemporary issues. I hope that you can see the past as a foreign place. And I hope that you can see like, the humanity that exists in all of these different encounters, right? Like immigrant inspectors are trying to do their jobs. Congressmen are trying to legislate. Immigrants are trying to get a better life. Like, it's like everybody's trying to do human stuff. And so like, I think that I hope that whatever I do for this project keeps those values at its heart. Whether that's digital or in a book or both, or that's what I hope.
Yeah, I don't have any better answer. I think one of the things that I really worry about, you mentioned that we're all, as humanists, we're all building our own little archives, which only is meaningful if they're preserved.
Right.
That's part of the sort of, I guess, public humanities thing that I'm really concerned about. I don't know that I have any answers, though, because one of the problems that we have in academic settings is that our stuff is intentionally space and place based,
right?
In that we don't necessarily leave campus and participate in nonprofits. Like we're not working directly with, local historians trying to document the area that we live in, or, any of those communities that, would provide access to the people around us that might be interested in some of these things. And the way that we publish in academic spaces necessarily publish is counter to sharing, because we have to demonstrate our participation in a specific discourse,
right?
And
which is oriented around like rigor.
It's a completely different language, It's like, I don't know. But when we talk about building out a project in Omeka or building out a project in WordPress or something like that, it potentially does become something that can be used And so I think one of the things that we will probably end up doing is really focusing on like how metadata is collected and indexed by web crawlers, and like how can we use that technology to make our projects more findable.
Right.
And I think there's a really big barrier with that, because most DH practitioners that I know do it a little on the side.
Yeah.
It's not something that they're capable of doing as their full-time position. And so adding these layers of like, how do I make my work findable on top of I need to get this finished so that I can go up for tenure?
Right.
It's just like a bridge too far for a lot of people. It is too much to ask.
Yeah.
It's beyond their bandwidth. And I don't know. I personally am really trying to think of ways to put workflows and templates together that people can just apply to their work to make some of these things happen without them having to come up with it themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a fundamental problem.
Yeah.
It's like a fundamental problem everywhere. I mean, the religious studies department here, like, I think in sort of a beautiful and also like kind of risky way, is acknowledging digital work towards tenure. Like, it's in our guidelines. But like, how do you peer review? How do you compare a digital project towards an article or a book or something? I mean, like, those are fairly unresolved questions, I think. But like, and I know that like this department is in the minority, because like in my PhD program, it was totally on the side. I mean, literally side hustles. Could not use digital work for my dissertation, couldn't use it for language fluency, couldn't use it for anything other than, additional income, which I then couldn't report to the university, because being like a graduate TA, that's a full-time employment, right? So like, anyway, I think that like it's a fundamental problem in academia, which to me is rooted with like not recognizing digital labor as labor. So I think it comes full circle a little bit.
It does. I want to wrap up, but first I want to ask you, I know you're just starting your book proposal. Let's look into the future.
Okay.
The book is on the shelf.
Yeah.
What's next?
Okay. Here's my second pitch. So there's this missionary. Her name is Catherine Maurer, and she's a Methodist missionary, I think. She lived on Angel Island, the immigration station in San Francisco, from 1910 until 1940 when it closed. So from when it opens to when it closed. She did stuff there. Part of the problem is that we don't totally know what she did, because she burned her papers. And so I'm interested in this kind of impossible question. How do you study this thing, this, moment, this person, and this like environment when you're missing the thing that you would need to study it?
Yeah.
And I think it could be a really fun sort of digital process exploration. Can DH afford pathways into asking questions and trying to formulate answers to what her nickname is, the Angel of Angel Island, what the Angel of Angel Island did in her, job and life there. Can you scrape newspapers? Can you reconstruct this space in virtual reality? Can you think through the different sort of, like social networks that would be needed to facilitate, a lasting presence in this really bureaucratic space? What does the funding look like? Anyway, so I think that there could be a really interesting kind of impossible project. Like, I'm never going to know what her story really is. But I think that's part of the fun. And
Yeah.
and I would love to write and sort of think reflectively and reflexively, like, you know, what is the scope that digital tools really afford in terms of like answering this impossible question? There's both a way to test our limits of knowledge, the limits of our tools, and also like really measure how far they can go in trying to tell a story like that.
Mm-hmm.
Ask me, that might be totally different in a year.
Yeah. I think one thing that is going to be really fun is feeding everything that you know about this person into AI and seeing if they can write a biography of them
That would be great.
like tell a story about. I think it's going to be really interesting because we're going to see all kinds of like extras added in.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, like 10 fictitious stories about a person.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. Jeff, thank you so much.
This has been great. Thank you so much for having me.
I love this because I am able to document what's happening on our campus, and I get to learn more about what other people are doing, and that's a real benefit to me. And I want to make our DH here at the University of Alabama more visible.
Yeah.
And another thing that I want to do is have these kinds of interviews with people recorded so that when our graduate students are trying to think of different projects, they can hear us talk through our experiences. Totally. I think that's really valuable. And it's not something that is necessarily available out there for DH projects.
Yeah.
We don't ever get to, look under the hood.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much for your time.
Likewise.
This episode of ADHC Talks has been brought to you from the campus of the University of Alabama. This is Sara Whitver. Join us again next time to hear more about DH folks and their super cool projects. Goodbye!